Well, you know what? If you don't mind, let's do Amos Miller now while we have the audiences on both platforms, and then get to the first topic. What is the status of Amos Miller now? He's been having more and more problems.
So what they've done is first they detained a bunch of food in his freezer and refrigerator. Then they ordered its destruction, and not only ordered its destruction, they told him that that he couldn't feed his own family with a bunch of it, that he couldn't even feed his own pigs with it. This came after their own testing confirmed that almost all of the food was completely safe and had nothing at issue with it at all. They ordered food they knew to be safe, destroyed, and not allowed for anyone to consume it. Then they started telling him what could be used for personal use and what couldn't. They were dictating what a farmer from his own freezer could feed his own family and what could feed his own pigs. Told him you can't use this, you can't use that, you can't even feed your own pigs with it. This was food, again, that they had tested and came back clear. They'd been hiding the testing results for more than a month. They just released them on Friday after multiple demands by my office. And the testing results showed what I suspected all along, that they had claimed that there was E. coli, certain E. coli in Amos Miller's food, based on an unconfirmed report out of New York. Their own testing showed there was no E. coli in his food. None of that strain existed. And also, they tested for salmonella. Didn't exist. They tested for listeria. Listeria didn't exist in almost any of the samples. Only a small percentage of samples had listeria. We had independently tested that. It came from a third-party farmer providing some milk, and he just cut that off and got rid of it. It means his food has now been tested, his environment's now been tested, his water samples have been tested, come back clean. And yet there's still an injunction in place prohibiting him from making, distributing any raw milk-related product. They are seeking a complete shutdown of the farm. The hearing on Thursday is whether the raw milk-related injunction will stay in place. This is a power they legally don't have. That, in fact, we've found no precedent in the history of Pennsylvania where any court has stopped a farmer from farming. Just doesn't exist. In fact, haven't found an example anywhere in the country where this authority has been given. Pennsylvania law is quite clear that the only power that the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture is given as it relates to the destruction of food is that it be proven that it's unfit for human consumption. The Secretary Redding's destruction order doesn't make that claim at all. Doesn't say any of it is unsafe for human consumption. Instead, in fact, doesn't claim it's adulterated. Instead, the only claim is that it didn't have a label on the package saying PDA approved, even though it's not PDA approved, and that's the way the people want it. They want it the Amish way, not the PDA way.
And that's Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture approved. Does it need to be for any particular, under any compelling piece of legislation?
It's preposterous at multiple levels. The law in Pennsylvania, according to the Attorney General's own opinions, dating from the inception of these laws, said that state inspection power only begins at, quote, the retail shelf. This food was taken from his own freezer. It wasn't on a retail shelf. The law, the definition of packaging, it only applies once it's on the retail shelf. None of this needed to be packaged. None of it was packaged. So their claim that, it wasn't branded the way we want it branded has no application. Once it is packaged, it lists the source, it lists the ingredients. But it wasn't being packaged. They're claiming that goods have to be packaged when they're sitting in your own freezer as a farmer. There's no basis for that. It's directly contrary to Pennsylvania law. So the brief is being shared. There was also hundreds of declarations filed from all across the country, almost 400 sworn declarations of people testifying under penalty of perjury that they want and need Amos Miller's products as members of his organic farm in order for their own health. In some cases for religious reasons, some cases for politically expressive reasons, but in some cases necessary to their children's health. And right now they're being denied it, and their children's health is being put in danger. The state of Pennsylvania continues to lie and say this is about safety and about consumer choice. They know it's not. that we have sworn testimony that the only allegation from over almost a decade ago, that said that any raw milk product of Amos Miller caused any harm, the caretaker has testified now under penalty of perjury that the grandmother they identified as being sickened by raw milk actually never even drank raw milk, and she had 4th stage cancer. So the state of Pennsylvania has known this, and they lied about it. What they've done is they've just lied repeatedly because they assume the Pennsylvania courts will be rubber stamps for their misuse and abuse of power. And the Pennsylvania legislature is asleep because they've been listening to the mainstream media just regurgitate like stenographers. That's what most of them are. They're not journalists in Pennsylvania. They're just stenographers. Whatever the state tells them, they just write and repeat that these lies about Amos Miller. Amos Miller has produced literally millions of food products over a quarter century. If you go back to his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather, all of them farmers right there in Lancaster County, have produced all kinds of food product, and you won't find Amos Miller ever listed on a recall anywhere by the state of Pennsylvania in that entire history. In fact, they have produced not one single piece of evidence of one single member of Amos Miller's organic farm that has ever complained about Amos Miller's food products. To the opposite, they want and need and demand his product. The state of Pennsylvania is claiming the authority that if it's not PDA approved, you're not allowed to have it in your fridge anymore. You're not allowed to have it in your freezer anymore. You're not allowed to feed your own family with it anymore. You're not even allowed to feed your own pigs with it anymore. This is an extraordinary power grab built on extraordinary lies, and they depend entirely on the culpability and complicity of the Pennsylvania courts not doing their job and holding the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture to account. My guess is the Agriculture Secretary, Redding, who has signed off on these illicit and unauthorized detention orders, these illicit and unauthorized food destruction orders, explicitly beyond his statutory authority and in violation of what Pennsylvania courts have said is their constitutional constraint on their authority, that you watch, he won't be there on Thursday afternoon. My prediction is Secretary Redding will be hiding in Harrisburg rather than show up and defend his lawless actions because he can't defend his lawless actions. What we're going to find out is whether the Pennsylvania courts will enforce the law when it comes to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture or not. We'll find out on Thursday afternoon.
But this started with the federal government. How did it? I mean,
all really started with the state of Pennsylvania. So there's a lawyer at Penn State that has been demanding, that's part of a center, agricultural center, by the way, that is funded by big corporate agriculture, that has been trying to wipe out small family farmer competition from the inception, have misused and abused these regulations and the regulatory state to enrich and empower themselves at the expense of the small family farmer. We went from 1 out of 5 food products being created and produced by the small family farmer to less than 2% of all food today in America. 98% of food is controlled by corporatized, industrialized farmers. These regulations are designed to bankrupt small farmers. You cannot compete if you're under their regulatory restrictions. And the other deep irony in all this is that they claim it's for food safety and consumer choice, when what they're trying to do is take away consumer choice. And we now know from a half century is that they are horrible at, say, food safety. That raw milk doesn't produce the most listeria outbreaks. Pasteurized milk does. Even though the FDA and the PDA have been claiming for years falsely that pasteurization gets rid of all the bad bacteria. Now, one problem is it also definitely gets rid of a lot of the good bacteria, but it turns out they're wrong. Corporatized industrialized food is the main, in fact, it's about 99.9% of all food outbreaks, all pathogen outbreaks, all food recalls come from the corporatized industrialized food made the PDA way. That's why ordinary people don't want it that way anymore. And all you can do is take a Photoshop of all the unhealthy lard asses at the PDA and realize people don't want to eat their way. They more and more people, this is about a tiny little share of the food market getting to choose what goes into their own body, and about a tiny little share of the food market being able to be family farmers and sustainable. And they don't want them to be. They know that the moment they have a regulatory a restraint on the back of these small family farmers, they wipe them out. They also demand that the farmer add chemicals, add additives, add preservatives to food that people don't want. We know it doesn't work. We have, as Robert Kennedy keeps talking about, a chronic health epidemic in the United States, a chronic disease epidemic in the United States. And it's directly related to our food supply becoming corporatized and industrialized. People who've done their own individual research look at the Amish, and they see that the Amish lifestyle produces healthier, happier people that live longer lives with fewer and less disease. So some people want to benefit from that. The state of Pennsylvania doesn't want to let you benefit from that. It wants to prohibit you from benefiting from that. It also exposes how their regulatory system is a scam. It doesn't produce safe food. It produces unsafe food. The most dangerous food in the state of Pennsylvania is food that's been PDA approved, PDA permitted, PDA licensed. Like 99.9% of food recalls come from PDA permitted facilities because they don't know what they're doing. They're all bureaucrats. Almost none of them have ever farmed a day in their lives. And you know where they go to work after they work for the government? Basically, they get bribed while they're in the government because then they go and work for the same big corporations they were supposedly regulating while they were in office. So it's one big fat fraud. And the case against Amos Miller is a case meant to destroy food freedom and small farmers in America. And if it succeeds, it will set a perilous precedent for everybody everywhere. And that's why the case is so consequential. There's going to be a rally before around 11:30 or so, late morning that Thursday in Lancaster County in support of Amos Miller. It does appear the court will not allow the case to be broadcast, will not allow the case to be, you won't be able to have video access or any access unless you're physically inside the courtroom, which has limited space available to it. So you got to get there early to be able to get space, it would appear. I'll find out on Monday if the court will change its mind on that, but that's my understanding at the moment. There are some witnesses that will be allowed to testify remotely, which is good because there's people who really want to testify, but for health reasons cannot physically get themselves to Lancaster County. But it's deeply disturbing what the state is up to. This is an extraordinary power grab. And, I am starting to hear from more Pennsylvania legislators who are shocked. They didn't realize, they thought this was just about making sure the food was safe. They didn't realize it has nothing to do with the food safety. Both the detention order and the destruction order says nothing about the food being dangerous at all. Nothing about the food being unfit for human consumption. And that's the legal predicate to destroy any food under the laws in Pennsylvania. But they're just ignoring it. They're saying we can now go in and take your property and destroy your food and destroy your opportunity to purchase food solely because it isn't a PDA approved facility in the first place.
But as a pure matter of fact, much of the food has already been destroyed, wasted, spoiled.
Yes, a lot of it already has been, and their goal is to destroy the rest of it, and to even prohibit him from feeding his own pigs with it, even prohibiting him from feeding his own family with it. It's again, power that they do not have by law, that the Pennsylvania courts have repeatedly ruled it would be unconstitutional under the Pennsylvania Constitution, and we're challenging it on the grounds of the U.S. Constitution as well. You should have the liberty interest of the due process clause of the United States Constitution should at a minimum protect the longest traditional liberty in American history, which is the ability to buy food directly from its producer, particularly traditional food such as dairy, meat, and poultry. But you know what PDA says? PDA says the only healthy poultry is if you stick a bunch of chickens in a tiny little factory farm where they eat each other's dung, and then that's a healthy food, not the kind made on a free range and by an organic farmer doing it the way they've done it for centuries. That couldn't possibly be safe. The only thing that could be safe is when your animals are eating each other's dung.
And I was going to say, like, even with the labeling that they put on some of these bigger brand things to make it seem like they're free range and open air, it's so often mislabeling that it's effectively false advertising. I just wanted to bring this up, Robert. It's amazing. Just like, listeria outbreaks. This is on the CDC from grocery cheese and deli meat.
And supposedly that can't happen. And again, I mean, they're putting this microscope on an unidentified amount of listeria being in a very small amount of his food supply, that the source was identified and taken care of. It's now completely clear. And it's on a farmer that has had the lowest rate of food safety incidents of any farmer in the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, given the amount of food he's produced over a quarter century, to have zero complaints from consumers of safety issues, and that's the guy you're trying to take out? While every day in Pennsylvania, somebody has to issue a food recall from these big corporatized, industrialized, commercialized food producers and processors, none of whom are ever raided, none of whom ever have food detained, none of whom ever have food destroyed, none of whom ever have an injunction issued against them. And I mean, and Redding keeps going around lying to people saying, oh, we've been trying to work with Amos Miller. Complete fraud, complete lie. I've been his counsel now for many years. PDA didn't reach out one single time. Because they did in their internal emails, they joked about what they wanted to have happen to Amos Miller. And you know what it was? They kept showing pictures of Amish in handcuffs. They wanted him in handcuffs. That's who they are. They're liars and frauds. And the only question is whether the Pennsylvania court will uphold the law or defer and cower to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. That's the only question. And all the legislators asleep at the wheel in Pennsylvania better wake up, because this power is going to be used and misused and abused to wipe out small family farmers and organic farmers in the state. They're not coming after Amos Miller to stop at Amos Miller. They're coming after Amos Miller to get the rest of us.
Amos Miller will be the agricultural equivalent of Alex Jones.